Workshop light was still on. That's what stopped me at the back door. My husband never left it on. 31 years of marriage, and Walter never once wasted electricity. He'd walk back from the car to flip a switch he'd already turned off, just to be sure. But Walter had been gone for 7 months now, and I'd stopped going into the workshop at all. I set down my grocery bags on the kitchen counter and looked through the window. The light was on, and the side door to the workshop was open about 6 inches. My chest did something strange. Not quite fear, more like bracing. I walked across the backyard in the dark. May evening, cool and damp. The grass needed cutting. I'd been meaning to call someone about that. I pushed the door open. My son was inside. Kevin stood with his back to me, going through the cabinet above Walter's workbench. His hand was inside the second drawer, the one where Walter kept the velvet-lined box. The box was already on the counter. Open. Empty. I said his name. He spun around. 41 years old, and he still had the same look he got as a boy when I caught him in something. Eyes a little too wide, shoulders coming up. "Mom?" He said it like I was the one who'd surprised him. "I didn't hear you pull in." I looked at the empty box, then at him. "Where is it?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I need to talk to you about something." "Where is the watch, Kevin?" It wasn't a question. He knew it wasn't. The watch had belonged to Walter's father. A 1952 Hamilton Seaview, military-grade railway certified. Walter's father wore it through Korea, through 30 years working the Pennsylvania rail lines, through every important day of his life until he died and put it in Walter's hands. Walter wore it every day for 22 years. When his wrist swelled from the medication last year, he put it in the velvet box himself, set it on the workbench, and said, "That goes to Kevin when he's ready." He'd been very specific about the "when he's ready" part. "I sold it," Kevin said, "last week." The words landed wrong, like he'd said them in the wrong order, and I needed to rearrange them before they made sense. "You sold your grandfather's watch. Tiffany's been talking about this cruise for 8 months. Her whole family is going. Her parents, her 2 sisters, their husbands. She said if we don't go, it'll be the first family trip she's missed in 15 years. His voice had that particular flatness it got when he was repeating something he'd been told to say. "I needed the money. I got $1,800 for it." $1,800. Walter spent the last year of his life polishing that watch every Sunday morning. He'd sit at the workbench with the soft cloth and the cleaning solution and take the whole movement apart and put it back together just to keep it running right. He said it was how he talked to his dad. $1,800. That was not yours to sell. "Dad's gone, Mom. You never wear it. It was just sitting in a box." "It was sitting in a box because your father put it there for you." Kevin looked at the floor. "Tiffany thinks I know what Tiffany thinks." I picked up the empty velvet box and set it back in the drawer and closed it. "You need to leave." He left without arguing. That told me everything I needed to know about whose decision this had actually been. I sat in the workshop for a long time after he drove away. Walter's tools were all where he left them, hung on the pegboard in careful order, every handle facing the same direction. His work stool was pulled up to the bench the way he always left it, like he just stepped out for a minute and was coming back. On the shelf above the bench, there was a jar of the orange hand cleaner he used, nearly empty. His reading glasses, a framed photograph of the 2 of us at our daughter's wedding, 11 years ago. I don't know why he kept it out here. I never asked. I turned off the light, went back inside, sat at the kitchen table until it was late enough to justify going to bed. The call came 4 days later. I almost didn't answer. A known number, and I'd been getting a lot of robocalls lately. But something made me pick up on the 4th ring. "Is this Pauline Marsh?" A man's voice. Older, careful, like someone choosing words deliberately. "It is. Mrs. Marsh, my name is Roy Kimball. I own Kimball Estate Watches on Prospect Street downtown. I believe I recently purchased a Hamilton Seaview that may belong to your family." I put my hand on the edge of the table. "I bought it from a younger man last week," he continued. "But I'd like you to come in if you can. There's something you need to know, something I found inside the watch." Inside the watch. I wrote down the address. I was in my car 8 minutes later. Kimball Estate Watches was a narrow storefront between a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop, the kind of place you could walk past for 20 years without noticing it. The window display had 4 watches on velvet stands and a small hand-lettered sign that said Established 1987. I pushed open the door and a bell rang overhead. The man behind the counter was maybe 70, heavy-set, with white hair and the slow, deliberate movements of someone who spent his life working with small, precise things. He looked up when I came in and immediately came around the counter. "Mrs. Avraratine. Marsh." He put out his hand. His grip was firm and dry. "I'm Roy. Thank you for coming so quickly. You said something inside the watch." "Yes." He looked at me carefully. "Can I ask, did your husband work on this watch himself?" "Every week. For years." He nodded like that confirmed something. "I've been doing this for 37 years. I can recognize handwork. When your son— I assume it was your son?" "Yes. When he brought the watch in, I gave him a fair price. It's a beautiful piece, genuine condition. But when I opened the movement to assess it properly, I found something in the case back. A folded piece of paper. Very small, very thin. It had been placed there deliberately. Inside the case, underneath the movement." He paused. I didn't read all of it. I read enough to understand that it wasn't mine to read. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my sides. Roy led me to a workbench at the back of the shop. The Hamilton sat there under a magnifying lamp, case back removed, the movement gleaming in the light. Next to it, unfolded on a clean white cloth, was a small square of paper. Walter's handwriting, small and careful, the way it always was when he was being deliberate about something. Roy stepped back. "I'll give you some privacy." I sat down on the work stool and picked up the paper. "Pauline, if someone other than Kevin found this, please get it to him. If Kevin found it, son, this is for you. I'm putting this here because this is the one place I know you'll eventually look. You always loved watching me work on Grandpa Ed's watch. You'd sit on that stool and ask me to explain every part. That's how I know you'll take care of it. There are things I need to tell you both. I've been worried about something for the last year, and I didn't say anything because I didn't want to cause trouble without being sure. But I'm not going to have time to be sure. So I'm writing it down. Kevin, your wife has been asking me questions. Specific questions. About the house, about what it's worth, about whether your mother has a will, about what happens to assets when someone dies without one. She asks, while you're out of the room. She's careful about it. I don't think you know. I looked into some things. There's a folder in the locked cabinet in the workshop. The key is on my key ring, the small brass one with no teeth on the left side. Everything I found is in there. Protect your mother, and protect yourself. I think you're a good man who loves his wife. I also think she knows exactly how much that works in her favor. All my love, Dad." I read it twice. My hands had stopped shaking. That happened sometimes when something was serious enough. Everything in me would just go quiet and clear the way it did during a bad shift at the hospital, back when I was still working. Breathe. Think. Act. I found Rory at the front of the shop. "I need to buy this watch back," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "I paid $1,800. I'll pay $2,000. Mrs. Marsh." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not going to sell you your husband's watch. I'm going to give it back to you. The only thing I ask is that you tell me what I can do to help." I told him everything right there in his shop, standing between the display cases. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he went to the back, came out with a business card. "My nephew is a private investigator. He's good, discreet." He set the card on the glass counter. "And the watch is yours." Walter Marsh clearly knew what he was doing when he hid that note. Men like that don't do things carelessly. I took the card. I took the watch. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and Walter's words running through my head. The locked cabinet was in the back corner of the workshop, half hidden behind his rolling tool chest. I'd walked past it hundreds of times without thinking about it. Walter said he kept personal papers in there, tax documents, insurance. I'd had no reason to look. The small brass key was exactly where he said. On his main key ring, the one I'd put in the kitchen junk drawer after the funeral, because I couldn't figure out what else to do with it. The cabinet had 3 drawers. The bottom one was tax returns, going back 15 years. The middle one was insurance and the car titles and our mortgage documents. The top drawer was a manila folder with my name on it in Walter's handwriting. Inside the folder was a letter, 12 pages of legal pad paper covered front and back in his small, careful script. Dated 8 months before he died. He'd been investigating Tiffany for 14 months. Her real name, he'd found, was Tiffany Colborne. She'd been married twice before Kevin. First to a man named Patrick Wallen in Scottsdale, Arizona. Second to a man named Douglas Ferrer in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. In both cases, the pattern was the same. She entered a relationship with a man who had an aging parent with assets. The aging parent was gradually isolated, made to seem forgetful, unstable, a burden. Then the parent's property was sold. Then Tiffany was gone. Walter had documented all of it. Newspaper clippings, copies of marriage records he'd obtained online, names and phone numbers, a contact at the Scottsdale Police Department who'd worked the Whalen case, handwritten notes about conversations he'd had with Patrick Whalen's sister, who told him what happened to Patrick's mother, moved to a memory care facility she didn't need, her house sold, the money gone. Patrick's mother died 18 months later, still asking when she could come home. At the back of the folder was a separate page, a list, things Tiffany has said or done in the past 6 months. February, asked Kevin, while I was in the other room, whether our house is in both our names or just mine. Kevin told her. He didn't mention it to me. March, left a brochure on the kitchen counter for Sunrise Ridge Senior Living, accidentally. When I pointed it out, she said she'd picked it up for a friend. April told Kevin that I seemed confused at dinner. I was not confused. I had used the wrong word once and corrected myself immediately. May asked Pauline directly whether she'd thought about moving somewhere more manageable. Pauline said no. Tiffany said, of course. Just thinking about your comfort. I don't have enough proof to confront her in a way Kevin would believe. He loves her. She's very good. By the time I'm gone, she'll be in position to move on the house. Don't let her. I sat on the workshop floor reading for 2 hours. Walter had died not knowing if any of this would reach me. He'd hidden the note in the watch because he knew the watch would eventually come to Kevin, and Kevin would eventually open the movement the way Walter had taught him to. Because Walter had been teaching Kevin the right way to care for that watch since Kevin was 12 years old. He taught of everything. I cried for a while, sitting on the concrete floor with my back against the tool chest. Not the quiet kind, the kind that shakes your whole body. I cried for Walter dying with all of this in his head and no one to tell. I cried for the 7 months I'd spent thinking I knew everything about our life together. When it was over, I got up, washed my face at the workshop sink, and called Roy Kimball's nephew. His name was Curtis Webb. He answered on the second ring and said he'd been expecting Walter Marsh's wife to call eventually. Curtis had the energy of someone who found order comforting. When we met at a coffee shop near the freeway the following morning, he had a folder of his own already prepared. He'd done preliminary research the night before, he said. Walter had apparently reached out to him directly, 14 months ago. Your husband hired me for 6 weeks, Curtis said. He told me if he died before he could finish what he was doing, Roy would know to wait for you. He opened the folder. I've kept the file current. He showed me what he'd found in the last 7 months. Tiffany had been active on financial planning forums under a fake name, asking questions about how to approach a spouse's elderly parent about estate planning without triggering suspicion. She'd been researching properties in coastal North Carolina, not near where any of them lived. She'd opened 2 credit cards in Kevin's name without his knowledge, totaling just over $22,000 in debt. Charges for designer clothing, spa treatments, furniture shipped to a storage unit Kevin didn't know existed. Kevin earned $58,000 a year as a facilities manager. He did not know he owed $22,000. What can the police do right now? I asked. Nothing. She hasn't committed fraud in this state yet. The cases in Arizona and Louisiana are on record, but they were civil matters, joint accounts, technically legal transfers. Until she does something actionable here, law enforcement can't move. So we wait, we prepare, and we let her make the mistake. Curtis laid out what he expected to happen. The cruise was phase 1, he said. Come back feeling entitled. Phase 2, escalate the concerns about you. You're forgetful, you're isolated, the house is too much for you. Phase 3, suggest solutions. Memory care evaluations. Perhaps a conversation with an estate attorney. Phase 4, the house. My house was paid off and appraised at $340,000 18 months ago. I drove home and sat at the kitchen table with Walter's holder and made my own list. Every comment Tiffany had made about my memory in the last year. Every question she'd asked about the house, the finances, the will. Every time she'd sent Kevin upstairs on an errand while she stayed in the kitchen with me and moved the conversation somewhere particular. There were more than I'd realized. I'd been dismissing them one at a time. Written out together, they formed something unmistakable. I called Walter's two names. Patrick Whalen's sister, a woman named Roberta in Scottsdale, answered on the third ring. She sounded like someone who'd been waiting a long time for this conversation, too. She told me what happened to Patrick's mother in careful, measured sentences, the way people talk about things that still hurt, but that they've practiced putting into words. She wasn't declining, Roberta said. She was maybe a little slower than she used to be. Normal aging. But Tiffany would find things, a word forgotten here, a wrong turn on a familiar drive, and she'd bring them up. Keep a mental catalog. Then she'd share them with Patrick. Sympathetically. She was worried. She just wanted his mother to be safe. By the time we all understood what was happening, the house was under contract. I thanked her. She said, "Please stop her. She takes everything. Not just money. She takes years." Douglas Ferrer, in Baton Rouge, answered immediately. He was 63. His voice was flat and tired. He told me Tiffany had come into his life 4 months after his father's stroke, presenting herself as a healthcare worker. She'd been kind to his father in ways Douglas still thought about and couldn't reconcile with everything else. After the wedding, she'd convinced Douglas that his father's business, a plumbing supply company, family-owned for 35 years, was too much to manage alongside his father's care needs. They'd sold it for $210,000. 3 weeks later, she was gone. The worst part, Douglas said, is that my father knew. He told me twice, said something was off about her, that she asked him too many questions about the business. I thought he was being paranoid. Old man doesn't want his son to move on. His voice dropped. He died 2 years ago, still believing I chose her over him. Because I did. They came back from the cruise on a Wednesday. Kevin called me that night, cheerful, sunburned, full of stories about the excursion they'd taken in Nassau. I made dinner plans for Sunday. They arrived at 5. Tiffany brought wine and wore a dress I hadn't seen before. She kissed my cheek at the door and said I looked well. I had made pot roast. It was Walter's favorite and Kevin's, and I'd been making it since Kevin was small. I watched Tiffany look at the table, at the good dishes, at the photograph of Walter on the sideboard. Something moved through her expression very quickly and was gone. She controlled the conversation from the beginning. The cruise had been wonderful, transformative. The other couples they'd met were interesting, successful. She'd been thinking about things. Kevin deserves more, she said, not quite looking at him when she said it. We work hard, and we have so little to show for it. I keep thinking we're behind. I said the pot roast needed another minute and went to the kitchen. From where I stood, I could hear Kevin agree with her in a particular voice he used when he was worried about disappointing someone. After dinner, she said she'd been thinking about me. Living alone in a house this size, the yard, the maintenance, the stairs. She said it with a tilted head and a warm voice, and if I hadn't spent the last 2 weeks reading Walter's folder, I might have let myself believe it was genuine. I'm fine here, I said. This is my home. Of course, she smiled. We just want you to be comfortable, safe. Kevin nodded. He said we, where I expected I. After coffee, she excused herself to use the bathroom. She was gone 9 minutes. I gave her 5, then went to find her. She was in the upstairs hallway looking at the door to Walter's old office. The bathroom was downstairs, where it had always been. She startled when she heard me. She said she'd gotten turned around. I said the bathroom was downstairs. She laughed, touched my arm, said of course, silly her. I walked her back down the stairs. I wrote everything in my notebook before I went to bed. 2 weeks later, I called Kevin. Just you, I said. I need to show you something of your father's. He came on a Thursday afternoon and sat at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug and his shoulders already tense. I gave him Walter's letter first. He read it. I watched his face go through several things. Dad never trusted her. His voice was defensive before he'd finished the page. This doesn't mean, look at the marriage records. I laid them out. Tiffany Colborn and Patrick Whalen, Scottsdale, Arizona, 2017. Tiffany Colborn and Douglas Ferrer, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 2020. These could be coincidences. Someone with the same name. Call them. I slid the paper across the table. Walter's handwriting. Patrick's sister Roberta in Scottsdale. Douglas in Baton Rouge. Call them. Right now if you want. Use my phone. Kevin stared at the paper for a long moment. Then he looked at me. Why are you doing this to me? The question went through me like something cold. Because your father spent the last year of his life trying to protect you, and I'm not going to let that be for nothing. He left angry. He didn't slam the door, but he didn't look back either. I sat at the table for a long time after he left, Walter's folder in front of me, the watch on my wrist. I'd started wearing it every day, on my left wrist, the way Walter used to. Curtis called at 9 that evening. She's moving, he said. She booked a flight this afternoon, Atlanta, then connecting to Cancun. One way. Departs Friday morning 5:55. What happened? Kevin happened. Curtis's voice was careful. He confronted her tonight. I've been watching her accounts as a precaution, and she made 4 ATM withdrawals between 7 and 9 p.m. $11,200 total. She also bought the flight on a card Kevin doesn't know about. He confronted her. He called the numbers, spoke to Roberta and Douglas both. Then he went home and asked Tiffany about the credit cards. A pause. She told him he was acting paranoid, that he was letting his mother poison him against her. Then she started packing. I called Kevin. He answered on the first ring. She's gone. His voice was wrecked, hollow. She said I was weak, said I was weak, said I was just like all the others. A breath. Mom, what does that mean? Just like all the others? It means she's done this before, and she was planning to do it again. I kept my voice steady, the way I learned to in the ICU. Kevin, she's leaving on a Friday morning flight. Curtis Webb has been tracking her. If you'll give him a statement about the credit card she opened in your name, the police have enough to hold her on outstanding matters from 2 other states. But it has to be tonight. A long silence. What would Dad do? The question nearly broke me. I had to wait a moment before I could answer. Your father spent 14 months building a case because he loved you too much to let you be destroyed by someone who counted on that love. My voice was steady. He'd want you to finish it. Kevin said, tell me what to do. We met at my house at 11, Kevin, Curtis, and me. Kevin sat at the kitchen table and gave Curtis his statement, methodical and careful, listing every credit card charge he could remember that he hadn't authorized. His voice didn't shake. He looked like his father when he was concentrating. Curtis filed the statement electronically. The detectives in Arizona and Louisiana had been in contact with the local department for 2 weeks already. By midnight, there was a warrant. We drove to the airport at 3:30 in the morning. The city was dark and quiet, just the sodium lights on the highway and Kevin not saying anything in the passenger seat. I drove. Walter always said I was the better night driver. The terminal was half awake. Coffee carts just opening, fluorescent lights overhead, a few business travelers moving through with the particular purposeful blankness of people who do this every week. We stood near the ticket counters. Curtis had positioned us where we had sightlines to security. Kevin hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. I stayed close. She appeared at 5:15. 2 large bags, both new. A camel-colored coat, expensive. Hair perfect despite the hour. She moved through the terminal like someone who had done this many times and found it routine. 2 detectives in plain clothes were near the security entrance. They moved when she reached the line. Ma'am, can we speak with you for a moment? She turned. For just 1 second, something crossed her face. Then the smile came, composed, warm, practiced. Of course. Is something wrong? The detective showed his badge. We have a warrant for your arrest, Tiffany Colborne. My name is Tiffany Marchetti. Still smiling. Still pleasant. I think there's been a mistake. The second detective came up on the other side. She looked between them, calculating. Then she ran. She made it about 15 feet before airport security caught her. She fought, kicked, twisted, screaming that they had the wrong person. People stopped and stared. Several people took out their phones. A detective opened her second bag at the security checkpoint. Inside, cash in rubber-banded stacks, a passport in a different name, a laptop, documents with account numbers, and a prepaid debit card that turned out to hold $6,300. She was still fighting when they got the handcuffs on her. Then she saw us. Kevin was standing 20 feet away. She went completely still when she saw his face. Then she started screaming. You are nothing, she said to him. The pleasantness was gone entirely. Underneath it was something flat and contemptuous that I suspected had always been there. You were a job. That's all you ever were. A job with a paid-off house and a dead father and a mother just waiting to be put somewhere. Kevin stood completely still. I stepped up beside him. Just beside him. She turned to me and her face twisted. You, she said. You ruined 3 years of work. 3 years. Her voice cracked on it. And not with grief. With fury, with the particular rage of someone who has just watched something they planned very carefully fall apart. You should have just stayed in your lane, old woman. I looked at her for a moment. Thought about Walter sitting in the workshop, writing 14 months of notes into his careful small handwriting, trying to finish a job before he ran out of time. Thought about Roberta in Scottsdale, still angry after years. About Douglas in Baton Rouge, his father dying believing he'd been chosen against. My husband didn't stay in his lane either, I said. He was very glad for that. The officers took her through the security doors. Her voice faded. Then there was just the airport noise again. The PA system. The wheels of a luggage cart. Kevin stood very still for another moment. Then he let out a long breath. Let's go home, I said. 3 weeks later, a detective from the county DA's office called to tell me what they'd found. Her real name was Brenda Caulfield, born in Columbus, Ohio. She'd been running variations of the scheme for 9 years, beginning with smaller cons, identity theft, rental fraud, before graduating to what she called, in communications they'd found on the laptop, long-form work. The schemes got more elaborate as she got better at them. Patrick Whalen's family, Douglas Ferrer's family, 2 others they'd connected in the meantime. A family in Memphis, another in Northern Virginia. Kevin was to have been the 6th. Charges filed in 3 jurisdictions, Arizona, Louisiana, and here. Wire fraud, identity theft, theft by deception, forgery, criminal use of personal identification. The DA expected a plea agreement, 12 to 15 years federal. Kevin moved back into his old room for a while. I didn't suggest it. He just appeared one afternoon with 2 bags and stood on the porch and didn't quite ask if he could stay. I opened the door wider and said I'd put fresh sheets on. The annulment went through 6 weeks later. The marriage had never been legally valid. She'd been married to Douglas Ferrer under a different identity, and the divorce had never been properly filed. Kevin's lawyer handled the credit card fraud claims. Most of the debt was discharged. The rest I paid without mentioning it. Some days he was fine, made coffee, watched the game, talked about work. Some days he barely came out of his room until dinner. One morning I came into the workshop and found him sitting on Walter's stool with his grandfather's watch in his hands. He had the case back off. He was looking at the movement very carefully, the way Walter used to look at things he was trying to understand. I stood in the doorway and waited. I remember him showing me this, Kevin said without looking up. I was maybe 10. He explained every gear, said that if you understood how something worked, you could take care of it properly. Said that applied to everything, not just watches. He looked up. His eyes were wet. I forgot that. You didn't forget it, I said. You got confused for a while. It's different. He looked back at the movement. I should have trusted him. He tried to tell me. Those last months he kept asking questions about her, and I thought he was being difficult. Last time I saw him, we argued about her. He set the watch down carefully on the cloth. He died a week later. I never apologized. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I'd been carrying the folded paper from the case back for weeks, waiting for the right moment. I held it out to him. He read it again. When he looked up, his face had done something I hadn't seen in a long time. Opened up, somehow, like a window. He knew I'd find it, Kevin said. He knew you'd eventually take the watch apart to service it, the way he taught you. Kevin was quiet for a moment. He called me a good man. He believed that. Whatever she said, whatever she did, he knew what was in you. He just needed you to get through this and see it yourself. Kevin folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket. He didn't say anything else. We sat in the workshop for a long while, him on the stool and me on the old camp chair Walter kept in the corner. And eventually Kevin started telling me about a clock radio he'd found at an estate sale, an old Zenith from the 70s that he thought might be worth restoring, and I listened. And the workshop smelled the way it always had when Walter was in it, and something that had been cold tight in me for almost a year began, slowly, to ease. Roy Kimball came by the house one Saturday morning in September. He said he had something for Kevin. Kevin was sitting at the kitchen table when Roy came in. He set a small box on the table. Kevin opened it. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, was a watchmaker's loop and a set of precision screwdrivers, the good kind, Swiss-made. Your grandfather's watch needs proper care, Roy said. You should learn to do it yourself. Your father would have taught you eventually. I can teach you if you'd like. I'm in the shop most Saturdays. Kevin looked at the tools for a moment. Then he looked at me. Then he said yes. I found the note in Walter's folder that evening at the very back, a separate page I'd somehow missed the first time through. A paragraph in his handwriting, undated. Pauline. I don't know if this all works out the way I hope. I don't know how much time I have or whether the pieces will land right, but I know you. You've been steadier than me your whole life, and you raised a son who is fundamentally decent, which is the most important thing. Whatever else goes wrong, that's true. Hold on to that. Take care of the watch. Keep it running. It's how the Marshmen talk to each other. Now that I think of it, it's how I'll keep talking to you too. Love, Walter. I put the note back in the folder. I put the folder in the locked cabinet, in the top drawer where I'll know where to find it. That Sunday Kevin came over and we drove to Roy's shop together. Kevin went in for 3 hours. I sat in the car with my coffee and listened to the radio and watched the neighborhood go by. People walking dogs, kids on bikes. The ordinary Saturday morning texture of a city going about its business. When Kevin came out, his hands smelled like machine oil. He was smiling. A real one. We drove home. I made lunch. He told me what he'd learned. The watch is back on my wrist now. Left wrist, where Walter wore it. I've learned enough from Kevin to wind it properly, to check the crown, to know when it needs servicing. Some mornings I hold it up in the kitchen light and listen to it tick. I can still hear Walter in it. I always will. I've thought a lot about what made all of this possible. Not the investigation, not the arrest at the airport, not even Walter's notes. Though all of that mattered. What made it possible was a choice Walter made quietly, over many years, to pay attention, to notice things, to write them down instead of dismissing them, to hide a piece of paper inside a watch movement and trust that the right person would eventually open it up. That's not luck. That's the kind of discipline I didn't fully understand until I was sitting on a concrete floor in a workshop at midnight, reading my dead husband's handwriting by lamplight. I've been thinking about what the opposite of that looks like, too. Kevin loved Tiffany genuinely. That love was real, and she knew how to use it. She studied him the way a person studies something they intend to take apart. She knew his instinct to provide, his fear of disappointing people, his particular softness about his father. She built a life inside that knowledge, and Kevin, because he loved her, looked away from the things that didn't quite add up. He told himself his father was being difficult. He told himself I was being jealous or overprotective. He chose the easier story. That's not weakness, exactly. It's something more human than weakness. It's the way most of us protect ourselves from having to face something painful. The mind will do almost anything to avoid a truth that costs too much. But the cost of avoidance, in this case, turned out to be higher than the cost of the truth would have been. What I keep coming back to is this. Walter didn't have certainty. He had suspicion, and he had the discipline to take that suspicion seriously instead of talking himself out of it. He couldn't prove everything. He never got to finish, but he documented what he saw. He found people he trusted. He made plans he knew he might not live to see completed. He did the work anyway. That's what integrity looks like when no one is watching. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady and careful and stubborn about the truth. Roy gave Kevin a set of watchmaker's tools and an offer to teach him. Kevin said yes. That mattered more to me than almost anything else that happened, because saying yes to that was Kevin choosing to learn something real, to sit with patience and precision, to carry something forward instead of selling it off. It was him deciding what kind of man he wants to be on the other side of all this. People like Brenda Caulfield, whatever name she used, understand one thing very well, that kindness can be mimicked, that love makes people predictable, that most families have a crack somewhere that looks like an entrance. What they don't account for is the possibility that the people they're targeting have already thought it through, have already left a map. Walter left me a map, and I followed it. That's the whole story, really. A man who loved his family enough to prepare for the worst, a woman stubborn enough to keep going, a son who, when it finally mattered, chose to look at the truth instead of away from it. I wind the watch every morning now. Kevin showed me how to do it properly, how much tension is right, when to stop. He learned it from Roy. Roy learned it from decades of working with things that needed to be treated carefully to keep running. I think that's what we're all trying to do finally. Treat each other carefully enough to keep running. Walter knew that. He knew it about me, about Kevin, about what a family is supposed to be for. And he made sure, even from a distance, to remind us.